The first rain of the season in Los Angeles wasn't just a blessing. It was a revelation. It scrubbed the grime from the storefronts of Hollywood Boulevard, washed the dust from the palm fronds, and if you believed in the poetic justice of the city, perhaps even cleansed a little of the perpetual stain of ambition and desperation that clung to its streets. For Detective Isabella "Izzy" Garcia, however, the rain only served to deepen the chill in her bones, a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the crime scene tape fluttering like a neon yellow flag against the indifferent gray sky. The victim, a young woman named Chloe Sterling, was found in a dilapidated Victorian house in Silver Lake, a place that once held the ghosts of old Hollywood glamour, but now harbored only the stench of decay and something far more sinister. The address, 1437 Sycamore Lane, was etched into Izzy's mind, a new waypoint on the grim map of her career. The house itself, a 3-story monstrosity with peeling paint and boarded-up windows, looked like something plucked from a gothic horror novel, ironically fitting for the nightmare within. Izzy had seen a lot in her 15 years on the force: the grim aftermath of gang wars, the opulent bloodstains of celebrity domestic disputes, the quiet despair of suicides, but this was different. This spoke of a mind unmoored, a soul devoid of human empathy, and an artistry chilling in its precision. Chloe wasn't just dead. She was arranged. She lay on a threadbare Persian rug, a faded tapestry of crimson and gold, which now served as a grotesque stage for her final performance. Her limbs were splayed, wrists and ankles bent at unnatural angles, mimicking the floppy posture of a child's discarded ragdoll. Her eyes were open and glassy, staring up at a ceiling fan that whirred idly, a single solitary blade swaying brokenly, mocking the stillness of her form. A faint, almost sickly sweet scent hung in the air, something like lilies and decay, a cloying perfume that clung to the dampness. But the detail that made Izzy's stomach clench and the bile rise in her throat was the head. It wasn't Chloe's. Instead, a porcelain doll's head, pristine and unblemished with unervingly bright blue eyes and painted rosebud lips, sat precisely where Chloe Sterling's head should have been. The doll's porcelain skin was smooth, almost luminescent, a stark, unsettling contrast to the pale, lifeless flesh of the body beneath. Her actual head, severed with an almost surgical precision, was nowhere to be found. A single, perfectly preserved white lily lay nestled beside the doll's neck, its petals already beginning to bruise. "Forensics are still sweeping, Izzy," Detective Ben Carter said, his voice a low rumble beside her. Ben, her partner for the last 8 years, was a steady anchor in the storm of their profession. His salt and pepper hair was damp, plastered to his forehead, his usually booming laugh muted by the grim tableau before them. His eyes, usually crinkling with good humor, were shadowed with a familiar weariness. "Looks like no forced entry. Neighbors reported seeing her late last night. Maybe a party? House has been empty for months, squatters mostly. This isn't your typical Silver Lake flophouse, though. Looks like someone tried to keep it clean." Izzy didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the doll's head. It wasn't just a bizarre signature. It was a statement. This wasn't a crime of passion or convenience. This was a performance. A meticulously choreographed, darkly artistic display. The almost sterile cleanliness of the immediate area around the body, contrasted with the general squalor of the rest of the house, spoke volumes. Someone had prepared this space, almost revered it as a canvas. "You thinking what I'm thinking is?" Ben asked, his eyes scanning the periphery, the way they always did when a scene felt off. The subtle nuances of an unexplained anomaly always seemed to register with Ben first. "I'm thinking about the silence," Izzy murmured, gesturing around the surprisingly undisturbed room. No broken furniture, no overturned lamps, no signs of a struggle despite the horrific nature of the dismemberment. It suggested either a highly incapacitated victim drugged, perhaps, or an extremely skilled and methodical killer who operated with terrifying efficiency. And the precision. You don't get a cut like that without knowing exactly what you're doing. This isn't a hack job. It's a surgical operation. And the head. It's a prop. A very expensive, very specific prop. She knelt, gloved, examining the porcelain, noticing the faint, almost invisible hairline fractures spiderwebbing across the left cheek. It was an antique, no doubt. The craftsmanship was undeniable. Her eyes swept the room again, searching for something more, something that resonated with the unsettling familiarity she felt but couldn't place. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument for pattern recognition, was buzzing with an almost forgotten resonance. On a small, dusty side table, next to a faded photograph of a smiling family, presumably the house's former occupants, a relic of happier times, lay a single, neatly folded piece of paper. It stood out, too stark, too clean amidst the neglect. Izzy, still gloved, reached for it, her fingers brushing against the surprisingly heavy, good-quality paper, not cheap stationery. Unfolding it, she saw a line of elegant, almost calligraphic script, written in a dark, inky black. The first stitch in a new collection. Ben read over her shoulder, his brow furrowing. A collection? What the hell is that supposed to mean? Like a collector of dolls? Or bodies? His voice dropped on the last word, the implication chilling. Izzy's mind raced, a chilling current of recognition flowing through her. The doll's head, the precise cut, the theatrical staging, the cryptic message, the floral scent. It all coalesced into a terrifying whisper from the back of her memory. A memory not from a case file but from elsewhere. Something she had consumed, not investigated. Ben, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Get everyone out of here. Clear the scene, but don't touch anything else. Preserve every single speck of dust. And call Lieutenant Miller. Tell him I need him to pull every cold case from the last 5 years, specifically anything with unusual staging or missing body parts, and tell him to expedite it. Ben looked at her, concern etched on his face, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a grim seriousness. Izzy, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. Or worse, a premonition. Worse, she replied, her gaze returning to the doll's head, its painted blue eyes seeming to mock her, to hold a secret she was just on the verge of uncovering. I think I've read about one, and I don't mean a ghost from the past. I mean a ghost that's decided to step out of the pages. Back at the LAPD Wilshire Division, the fluorescent lights of the bullpen seemed to hum with an oppressive weight, casting a cold, clinical glow on the weary faces of the detectives. Izzy sat hunched over her desk, a lukewarm coffee long forgotten beside a stack of files. The initial reports from Chloe Sterling's scene were disturbing in their emptiness. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. The house was a ghost and the killer even more so. The only things left behind were the gruesome tableau and the chilling note. Lieutenant Miller, a man whose career was a testament to his doggedness, his inability to tolerate nonsense, and his surprisingly sharp intuition, strode into the bullpen, his face grim. His salt and pepper hair, usually immaculately combed, was slightly disheveled, indicating the early, stressful nature of his morning. All right, Garcia. Carter said you had a bad feeling and a theory. Let's hear it. And it better be damn good, because I've got a councilman on my ass about this Silver Lake mess. And the media is already sniffing around for details about the porcelain victim, as they're already calling her. Izzy pushed a well-worn, dusty file across the table towards him. It was a cold case from 5 years ago, one that had haunted her from the periphery of her awareness. Remember the porcelain princess case, sir? Alicia Vane, found in a deserted warehouse in Vernon? Same exact signature. Miller picked up the file, his brow furrowing as he flipped through the faded photos. A flicker of recognition, then dawning horror, crossed his features. Vane. Yes, I remember that one. Severed head, doll's head replacement. We thought it was a one-off, some sicko copycatting that serial killer from. Where was it, New York? The body sculptor or something? No, sir, Izzy corrected, a grim certainty in her voice that sent a shiver down her own spine. Not a copycat. The message left at the Vane scene was different, but the staging, the precision of the cut, the doll's head, is too specific. And the smell. The ME in the Vane case, Dr. Evans, He noted a distinct floral scent, specifically lilies, mixed with a faint chemical odor, like a preservative. They thought it might be something the killer used to keep the doll pristine, or a ritualistic element. Exactly like Chloe Sterling. She pointed to the crime scene report details. Miller's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the information. He knew Izzy. She wasn't one for flights of fancy. Her instincts were usually razor-sharp. But Vane was 5 years ago. This killer went dormant for 5 years? That's unusual. Most don't just stop. Especially not with such a unique, almost theatrical MO. Serial killers tend to escalate, not hibernate. Unless they were incarcerated or left the state, or they were refining their craft, waiting for the right moment, the right inspiration. Izzy suggested, her mind already racing ahead, piecing together a terrifying puzzle. Or maybe, just maybe, they were waiting for something, or someone, for a script to be written. Her mind kept returning to the unsettling familiarity. It wasn't just the Vane case. There was something else, something she'd consumed, not investigated. A story, a dark, twisted narrative that seemed to mirror the horror unfolding before her. Ben, who had been listening intently, interjected, his voice thoughtful. You said you read about a ghost, Izzy. You thinking of a book? A movie? Some true crime podcast you binged? Izzy's eyes widened, a sudden, horrifying clarity washing over her. That's it. Oh my God. That's it. She scrambled through her desk drawers, pulling out her personal tablet, her fingers flying across the screen with desperate urgency. A couple of years ago, a new author, K.L. Thorne, published this incredibly dark, disturbing thriller. It was a breakout hit. Everyone was talking about it. It was the kind of book that got under your skin and stayed there. The Dollhead Killer. Miller and Ben exchanged a bewildered glance. Miller, ever the pragmatist, scoffed. You're telling me we're hunting a killer who's inspired by a novel? People get inspired by all sorts of crap. Izzy. Doesn't mean the book itself is a blueprint. Plenty of nutjobs out there get ideas from pop culture. No, sir. Not just inspired, Izzy insisted, turning the tablet screen towards them. The cover of the ebook displayed a chilling image. A porcelain doll's head, pristine but with a single, dark crack running from its left eye, like a tear of blood. The title, stark white against a shadowy background, was unsettling in its simplicity. The Dollhead Killer. The premise of the book, The Dollhead Killer, is about a serial killer who meticulously stages his victims to resemble antique dolls, replacing their severed heads with porcelain ones. The protagonist, a troubled detective eerily similar to myself, if I'm being honest, realizes the killer is enacting scenes from a forgotten collection of Victorian horror stories. The first victim in the book. Her head is replaced with a doll's head, and a note is left that says, the first stitch in a new collection. Silence descended upon the bullpen, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of computers and the ringing of phones that went unanswered. Ben's face was pale, his earlier weariness replaced by a chilling realization. Miller's jaw was set, his eyes narrowed as he stared at the tablet screen, the pieces of Izzy's audacious theory clicking into place. And the author, K.L. Thorne? Ben asked, his voice strained, almost a whisper. Who is K.L. Thorne? Izzy's fingers trembled as she typed, bringing up the author's sparse bio. K.L. Thorne is a pseudonym. Nobody knows their real identity. They've never done interviews, never appeared at book signings, just put out this one incredibly successful, incredibly graphic novel, and then radio silence. No follow-up, no sequel, nothing. Just this one terrifying masterpiece. A horrifying thought, so audacious, so terrifying, that it made her stomach lurch, began to form in Izzy's mind. A connection too monstrous to be true, yet chillingly plausible. What if the book isn't just inspiration, Ben? She whispered, her gaze fixed on the tablet screen, on the chilling cover of The Dollhead Killer. The cracked doll's head seemed to stare back, a silent accomplice. What if it's a confession or a promise? A twisted, elaborate roadmap to a series of crimes that haven't happened yet. Miller slammed his hand on the desk, startling them both. a rare display of frustration and dawning horror from the seasoned lieutenant. All right, Garcia. This is a long shot, a wild theory, a leap into the realm of the absurd. But if there's any chance you're right, we need to treat it like gospel. This is no longer just a homicide. It's a potential serial killer, and one playing a very disturbing game. Get the publisher on the phone immediately. Find out everything you can about K.L. Thorne. Their real name, their location, their mother's maiden name, anything. And get me a copy of that damn book, yesterday. Physical copy. I want to feel the pages. On it, sir, Izzy said, already reaching for her phone, her fingers flying to dial the number for Crimson Quill Publishing. The company listed for The Dollhead Killer. And Izzy, Miller added, his voice grave, his eyes holding a new, unsettling glint. If this killer is following a script, we need to read ahead, fast, because if this is a series, there are more victims to come. The copy of The Dollhead Killer arrived an hour later via an agitated young officer who'd been dispatched to scour a downtown bookstore that still had a few copies in stock. Izzy held the paperback in her hands, its cover feeling cold and almost oily, as if the darkness within had seeped onto the pages, tainting the paper. She looked at the stark white title against the black background, the cracked doll's head staring out with vacant eyes, a chilling echo of the scene she had just left. She skipped the acknowledgments, the author's note, the dedications, all the typical literary apparatus. Her purpose was singular, grim. She dove straight into Chapter 1. The prose was elegant, disturbing, and shockingly vivid. The description of the first victim, a young woman named Elara Vance, was eerily similar to Chloe Sterling. The precise cut, the doll's head, even the faint scent of lilies detailed with disturbing accuracy. The note, as Izzy had recalled, was identical, the first stitch in a new collection. As she read, Izzy felt a growing sense of dread, a cold knot tightening in her gut. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a near-perfect replication. The killer wasn't just inspired by the novel. They were emulating it with an almost religious devotion, a terrifying fidelity to the fictional text. Ben sat opposite her, nursing a coffee, his own copy of the book open to a later chapter, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is insane, Izzy," he muttered, shaking his head, his voice barely above a whisper. Chapter 3 here. It describes a victim found in an abandoned church, dressed in a Victorian child's christening gown, her body arranged in a cradle made of discarded hymnals. Her head, a doll's head, of course, and the location descriptions are so specific. Izzy's blood ran cold, despite the warmth of the bullpen. An abandoned church? There's that old abandoned St. Michael's on the edge of downtown. Hasn't been used in decades, but it's still standing. And the old Resurrection Chapel in Lincoln Heights, L.A., is full of forgotten churches, places of decaying faith. Could be a coincidence? Ben offered, but his voice lacked conviction, the words hollow. The growing pile of eerie similarities made coincidence a statistical impossibility. Too many coincidences, Ben? Izzy retorted, her voice firm, already closing her book. The meticulous detail, the specific staging. This isn't coincidence. This is a pattern. And if we're right, if our Dollhead Killer is following this book chapter by chapter, then we need to anticipate their next move. We need to get ahead of the script before they can write another victim into the narrative. Her phone buzzed, vibrating against the worn surface of her desk. It was the publisher, a harried editor named Sarah Jenkins, whose voice sounded strained and on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "Detective Garcia, I understand this is urgent." Sarah's voice was tight with professional concern, laced with an underlying fear. "But K.L. Thorne, they're an enigma, complete ghost. We've never met them. All communication is done through encrypted emails. The manuscript was submitted digitally, anonymously. Payments for royalties go to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, a standard practice for authors seeking complete privacy. But Thorne's demands for anonymity were exceptional. We have no address, no phone number, no real name. They insisted on absolute anonymity from day one. It was part of the contract, non-negotiable. So, you have no lead at all?" Izzy pressed, a knot forming in her stomach, the hope that had flared so brightly beginning to dwindle. None that would identify them directly, Sarah admitted, a sigh escaping her, sounding like a deflating balloon. However, I can tell you this, the manuscript, while brilliant, was incredibly detailed. Almost too detailed. The descriptions of the murders, the forensic details, the psychological profiles of the killer. They were chillingly accurate. Our legal team actually had concerns, worried it might be based on real events, even if fictionalized. We had to run it by multiple lawyers to ensure we weren't publishing an instruction manual for a psychopath. So, the author could have first-hand knowledge. Izzy mused, a new, terrifying possibility presenting itself, one that made her blood run cold. Or they are the killer. Silence on the other end. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Detective, are you suggesting K.L. Thorne is responsible for these crimes? That the author of the novel is the actual Dollhead Killer? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper now, laced with a horrified disbelief that verged on outright terror. The reality of Izzy's theory was hitting her with full force. It's a theory we're exploring, Ms. Jenkins, Izzy confirmed, refusing to elaborate further, unwilling to utter such a monstrous possibility aloud unless absolutely necessary. Did K.L. Thorne ever mention Los Angeles in their emails? Any personal details, however small, that might hint at a connection to the city? Any unusual requests or comments? Not directly, no personal anecdotes, Sarah replied, her voice still trembling. But the setting of the novel is explicitly Los Angeles. The abandoned places described, the specific streets, the hidden nooks and crannies. They're all real. We assumed the author just did extensive, meticulous research. They seem to have an almost encyclopedic knowledge of the city's forgotten landmarks, its history, its urban decay. They even described specific vintage shops and obscure art galleries that still exist. Extensive research or intimate knowledge? Izzy corrected under her breath, a grim certainty settling over her. Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. If anything at all comes to mind, no matter how insignificant, you call me immediately. Day or night. Don't hesitate. She hung up, her gaze falling back to the book. If the killer was indeed K.L. Thorne, or someone deeply connected to them, then the novel was not just a blueprint for the murders. It was a window into a twisted mind, a macabre diary of intent. We need to create a profile of K.L. Thorne based on the novel, Izzy declared, turning to Ben, her eyes alight with grim determination. Their writing style, their interests, their psychological makeup, their knowledge of forensic science, of L.A.'s forgotten corners. This book is the closest we have to a suspect interview. We need to dissect it, chapter by chapter, paragraph by paragraph, for clues about its creator. And then, Ben asked, the weariness in his voice betraying the late hour and the sheer mental exhaustion of the day. Then we read ahead, Izzy said, tapping the cover of the book, the cracked doll's head seeming to smirk up at them. We find the location of the next victim in the novel. We stake it out. We lay a trap. Because if our Dollhead Killer is following the script, they'll be there. They'll be there to put on their next performance. The idea was a desperate gamble, a Hail Mary pass in the dark, a venture into the unsettling territory where fiction and reality bled into each other. But it was the only lead they had. The chilling thought was that they were playing a game of cat and mouse, not with a simple criminal driven by base motives, but with a highly intelligent, meticulously planning artist of death, whose canvas was the city of Los Angeles, and whose medium was human life. And the script for this horrifying play was already written. The question was, how many acts remained? How many more victims were destined to become dolls in this macabre collection? Izzy picked up her copy of The Dollhead Killer, opening it to Chapter 2. The next victim in the novel was a disgraced former actress, found in the green room of a long-abandoned, historical theater, her final role a tragic parody. Izzy's mind immediately went to the grand, yet decaying old Orpheum Theater on Broadway, with its faded velvet seats and echoes of forgotten applause. Or maybe the $1 Million Theater, or the Palace, hidden gems now crumbling. The city was riddled with forgotten stages, each one echoing with past glories and current decay. Let's get going, Ben, she said, her voice firm, despite the knot of fear in her stomach and the lingering scent of lilies in her nostrils. We have a theater to find, and a killer to intercept. The rain had stopped, but the city still felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken secrets. Somewhere out there, a killer was meticulously planning their next performance, guided by the very words Izzy now held in her hands. And Los Angeles, the city of dreams, was about to become the setting for its most terrifying nightmare. The curtain was rising on the next act. The air inside the old Orpheum Theater was thick with the dust of forgotten dreams and the ghosts of standing ovations. Its once opulent crimson velvet seats were ripped, exposing their stuffing like surgical wounds. Gilded plaster cherubs on the ceiling flaked gold dust onto the floor below, mingling with cigarette butts and the silent despair of the homeless who occasionally sought refuge within its grand, decaying walls. For Detective Izzy Garcia and her small, hand-picked team, this once celebrated venue had become a crucible of their own making, a chilling trap set for a phantom killer. "All right, listen up," Izzy murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, echoing unervingly in the cavernous space. Moonlight, filtered through the grimy skylights, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with every slight movement. Ben, beside her, checked his comms. "Our target location is the green room backstage as described in Chapter 2. Ben and I will cover the stage level and the main green room. Detectives Chong and Miller, not the lieutenant, will take the upper levels, the dressing rooms, and catwalks. Detective Ramirez, you're on the perimeter, keeping an eye on the exits and the street. No one moves, no one engages unless I give the word. We're not here to spook them. We're here to catch them in the act. And remember, this killer is smart. Don't underestimate them, and don't assume the book is their only guide." The team, their faces grim and determined, melted into the shadows, their footsteps muffled by the layers of dust and debris. The eerie silence of the theater was punctuated only by the occasional scurry of a rat or the creak of settling timber. Izzy held her copy of the Dollhead Killer open to Chapter 2, its words a chilling counterpoint to the decaying reality around her. The book described the victim, Serafina Dubois, a washed-up screen siren, found in the green room, posed dramatically on an antique chaise lounge, a broken mirror reflecting her doll's head. "We need to find out who fits the Serafina Dubois profile in real life," Izzy whispered to Ben as they moved silently towards the backstage area. A former actress, past her prime, perhaps with a history of scandal or misfortune. Someone easily overlooked, easily lured. Ben nodded, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, momentarily illuminating a cracked plaster bust of some forgotten theatrical legend. "I've got my contact list working on it, checking all the usual suspects. Former child stars, B-movie actresses, anyone who faded from the limelight. This city's full of them." The hours stretched long and agonizing. The air grew colder, the dampness seeping into their bones. Izzy immersed herself in the novel, her flashlight beam tracing the words on the page. She devoured the details, searching for any subtle deviation, any hidden meaning. Thorne's prose was hypnotic, disturbing, revealing an almost academic knowledge of LA's forgotten history, its seedy underbelly, and its vibrant artistic past. The way Thorne described the decay of the theater, the smell of old grease paint and desperation, it was chillingly accurate, almost as if they were standing right there with them. This wasn't just research. It was intimate knowledge, a deep, unsettling connection to the city's underbelly. "He describes the exact make of this theater," Izzy murmured, pointing to a passage describing ornate, but decaying Romanesque architecture. "And the stage rigging, the old fly system, even the specific brand of lighting equipment they used in the 40s. It's too precise for someone just researching online. This person knows this place, knows it intimately. Someone who perhaps worked here?" Ben suggested, his voice low. "Or was obsessed with it. A former stagehand, a historian, a theater buff gone wrong." Suddenly, Izzy's comms crackled. It was Ramirez. "Detective Garcia, I've got movement. Back alley, 3 blocks east. Looks like a black sedan, no plates, just pulled up to." "Wait, it's not the Orpheum." It's the old Velvet Curtain Theater, just a few blocks away. Izzy's heart sank. The Velvet Curtain? She racked her brain. The name was familiar, but not from the main body of Chapter 2. She flipped frantically through the novel, her fingers skimming the index, the glossary, the author's notes. And then she found it, tucked away in an obscure appendix, a brief mention in a list of LA's forgotten jewels, burlesque and vaudeville halls. The Velvet Curtain, a smaller, more intimate venue, known for its risque shows in the 50s, now nothing but a boarded-up shell. Damn it! Izzy cursed, her voice tight with frustration. He's not just following the book, Ben. He's interpreting it. He's making it his own. A grand performance deserves an intimate stage. That's what the note said at the Sterling scene, the first stitch in a new collection. He's not just a copycat. He's an artist, using the book as a base, but adding his own twisted flair. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The killer wasn't predictable. They were intelligent, cunning, perhaps even mocking them. The pressure intensified, a cold, heavy weight settling on her shoulders. Lieutenant Miller would be furious, but also, Izzy knew, grimly intrigued by the killer's audacious cunning. They had fallen for the obvious trap, while the killer danced around them. "All right, everyone," Izzy barked into her comms, her voice sharper now, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and anger. "Abort mission at Orpheum. Head to the Velvet Curtain, 879 Grand Avenue. Move fast but quietly. Let's not make the same mistake twice." The Velvet Curtain lived up to its name. Even in its decay, there was a theatricality about it, a sense of faded glamour. Unlike the Grand Orpheum, this was a more intimate space, designed for up-close viewing. The air inside was heavy with the scent of cheap perfume, stale beer, and something far more sinister. The victim was indeed there, laid out on what was once the main stage, beneath a single, dust-covered spotlight that had somehow been rigged to illuminate her. Her name was Evelyn Hayes, a former burlesque dancer from the 70s, now a recluse, fitting the disgraced actress profile with chilling precision. She was posed dramatically, one arm flung out as if in a final, tragic dance pose. And, of course, where her head should have been, sat a porcelain doll's head, its painted smile unervingly bright in the dim light. This one had a small, intricately painted teardrop under one eye. The note, placed delicately on her chest, was different from the last. The encore. Izzy clenched her jaw. He's escalating. He's playing with us. Forensics swarmed the scene, meticulous in their grim dance. Again, no identifiable fingerprints, no obvious DNA. The killer was a ghost, leaving behind only their gruesome art. Back at the LAPD Wilshire Division, the mood was somber, tense. Miller paced his office, a fresh copy of the Dollhead Killer clutched in his hand. "He's making a fool out of us, Garcia. A damn fool. First Chloe Sterling, now Evelyn Hayes. 2 victims in a week, both right out of the damn book, but with enough deviation to keep us guessing." "He's not just a copycat, sir," Izzy insisted, gesturing to the open novel on her desk. "He's K.L. Thorne, where he thinks he is, where he wants to be. This isn't just a murderer. It's a frustrated artist, a storyteller trying to control the narrative of his own creation." "All right, Izzy. Let's operate under that assumption for now, as insane as it sounds," Miller said, rubbing his temples. "If Thorne is our man or woman, we need to know everything about them. The publisher gave us nothing. So, how do we find a ghost?" Izzy pulled out a laptop. "We deconstruct the author through their work. I've started analyzing the digital footprint of the manuscript submission to Crimson Quill. Sarah Jenkins, the editor, mentioned encrypted emails and a shell corporation. We're working with the cybercrimes unit to see if we can trace anything IP addresses, unique formatting styles, any metadata embedded in the original document files that might have been overlooked. It was a long shot, but they had to try. Beyond the tech, we need to dissect the narrative itself," Izzy continued, her voice gaining momentum. "Thorne's writing style is sophisticated, almost academic. There's a fascination with classical Greek tragedy, the idea of inevitable fate, the hero's downfall. There are subtle Freudian undertones in the characters' psychological profiles, especially the killer's, and a shocking understanding of human anatomy and criminology. This isn't some amateur slasher fiction. This is meticulously researched, expertly crafted. The author is highly intelligent, well-read, possibly with a background in literature, psychology, or even medicine. Ben, who had been listening intently, added, and a strong sense of theatricality. The staging, the notes, the collections, and encores. This killer sees themselves as a director, a playwright, and a performer. The LAPD's Behavioral Analysis Unit, after reviewing the case files and the novel, confirmed their suspicions. The profile suggested a highly intelligent, narcissistic, meticulous individual with a strong sense of theatricality and a deep-seated grievance or desire for recognition. The killer likely saw themselves as an artist, and the murders as their masterpieces. They were almost certainly local to L.A., given the intimate, almost obsessive knowledge of its obscure locations and forgotten histories. They might even have a collection of antique dolls themselves. Izzy reread The Dollhead Killer with renewed scrutiny, looking for anything that seemed out of place, any detail that didn't quite fit the meticulous narrative. She noticed subtle discrepancies in the book's timeline or character descriptions that, upon closer inspection, seemed almost like deliberate misdirections. Were these mistakes, or deliberate red herrings planted by Thorne to mislead curious readers, or perhaps future investigators? Then a glimmer, tucked away in a footnote, a single, archaic term for a specific type of porcelain used in the 19th century, blanc de chine. It was so obscure, so precise, that it stood out like a beacon. Izzy quickly researched it. Blanc de chine porcelain was rare, highly prized, and primarily used for intricate figurines and, occasionally, high-quality doll heads. This wasn't something a casual researcher would stumble upon. Ben, Izzy said, her voice sharp with excitement. Blanc de chine. It's a type of porcelain used for high-end antique dolls. It's mentioned once, just briefly, in a footnote about the origins of the killer's collection. Only a true expert, a connoisseur, would know about it, or the kind of artist who works with such materials. They immediately started tracking down specialist antique doll collectors and ceramics experts in L.A. who might recognize the term, or the specific type of doll head used in the murders. The search was slow, painstaking, sifting through a niche community of eccentrics and enthusiasts. Finally, after days of dead ends, they got a hit. An elderly, reclusive doll restorer and collector named Elias Croft, who lived in a decaying, Gothic mansion perched precariously in the Hollywood Hills, had posted on an obscure online forum about his expertise in blanc de chine restoration. His address itself seemed to be pulled directly from the pages of a dark novel. The Croft mansion was a monument to faded glory and obsessive accumulation. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that penetrated the heavy velvet drapes. Every surface was covered with dolls. Porcelain dolls with vacant stares, antique wooden dolls with jointed limbs, bisque dolls with delicate painted faces. Thousands of eyes, unblinking, watched their every move. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, dust, and something else. A faint, almost imperceptible smell of lilies and chemicals, the same scent Izzy had noticed at the crime scenes. Her skin prickled. Elias Croft himself was a peculiar figure, almost as skeletal and fragile as the dolls he lovingly restored. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, seemed to miss nothing. He was initially uncooperative, viewing them as intruders into his sanctuary. "Detectives?" Croft rasped, his voice thin and reedy. "I fail to see what my humble collection has to do with your, rather vulgar investigations. My dolls are works of art, not instruments of mayhem." He gestured vaguely towards a glass cabinet filled with particularly exquisite figurines. "Mr. Croft," Izzy said, her voice firm but respectful, "we know you specialize in blanc de chine restoration. The doll heads used in our murder cases are of that specific rare porcelain. And we noticed the faint scent of lilies, a preservative often used in restoration, clinging to them. We believe the killer may have had them restored, or had access to your expertise. Croft stiffened, his gaze sharpening. He peered at Izzy, then at Ben, his eyes lingering on Izzy's face for a moment longer, as if trying to read a hidden message. Lilies. Yes, a lovely scent. Some collectors prefer it for their antique pieces. It's an old European tradition. He paused, then sighed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. I did read that novel, The Dollhead Killer. Found the descriptions of the dolls eerily accurate, almost as if the author had seen my collection, or perhaps even commissioned work from me. Izzy's heart hammered against her ribs. Did they, Mr. Croft? Did K.L. Thorne commission work from you? Croft hesitated, his eyes darting towards a shadowy corner of the room. Not K.L. Thorne, no. The payments were always anonymous, through a series of intermediaries. A young man, very discerning. He knew precisely what he wanted. A brilliant mind, but troubled. Obsessed with the macabre, with transformation. He had a particular fascination with the darker side of doll artistry, the idea of repurposing the human form into art. Izzy leaned forward. Who was he, Mr. Croft? What was his name? Croft wrung his hands, his old eyes clouding with what looked like regret, or perhaps fear. Arthur Finch. He was my apprentice several years ago. Prodigy, truly. His hands were magic, he could repair anything. But his mind, it wandered into dark places. He saw beauty in decay, art in disfigurement. We had a heated argument about the ethics of art, as he called it. He believed that true art demanded sacrifice, demanded transformation. He disappeared shortly after that, without a trace. Just vanished. Arthur Finch. The name resonated with Izzy. It wasn't a name she recognized from her current cases, but it sounded right, to fit the profile. Intelligent, artistic, disturbed, familiar with dolls, and clearly with a morbid curiosity about anatomy and death. Did Arthur Finch write anything, Mr. Croft? Ben asked, sensing the breakthrough. Any stories, poems, manifestos? Croft's head snapped up, a look of dawning horror on his face. Yes, he did. He had an unpublished manuscript, a collection of dark stories he was writing. He called it The Human Puppetry Collection. He showed me some early drafts. It focused on the art of human puppetry and the idea of transforming people into art. The premise, the very core concept. It was chillingly similar to The Dollhead Killer. He was obsessed with it. He believed it was his masterpiece, a work that would finally gain him the recognition he felt he deserved. Izzy and Ben exchanged a grim look. The pieces were fitting together with terrifying precision. Could Finch be K.L. Thorne? And if so, how did his manuscript get published anonymously, under a pseudonym? Mr. Croft, do you have any of his personal belongings? Any journals, drafts of his stories? Anything that might have been left behind? Izzy pressed, her voice urgent. Croft led them to a dusty, forgotten attic room, filled with discarded furniture and forgotten memories. In a locked trunk, he found a few items. A worn leather-bound journal filled with intricate sketches of doll heads and anatomical drawings, and a stack of typewritten pages. The title page of the manuscript was stark, The Dollhead Killer, a collection of twisted tales by Arthur Finch. The realization was a punch to the gut. This was it. The original manuscript. Thorne hadn't just been inspired by Finch. Thorne was Finch, or at least, the purveyor of Finch's darkest imaginings. But how had a recluse's unpublished manuscript become a global bestseller? As they gathered the evidence, Izzy's phone buzzed. It was an anonymous text message, the number unidentifiable. You read the prologue, detective. You read chapter 1. You thought you were clever finding the stage. But are you ready for chapter 3? The true masterpiece is yet to be revealed. Don't worry, the location will be familiar. It was a personal challenge, a direct invitation to the game. The Dollhead Killer was watching them, mocking them, drawing them deeper into their twisted narrative. Arthur Finch was no longer just a suspect. He was an adversary, intimately aware of their every move, orchestrating the terrifying play with chilling precision. The anonymous text message, you read the prologue, detective. You read Chapter 1. You thought you were clever finding the stage. But are you ready for Chapter 3? The true masterpiece is yet to be revealed. Don't worry, the location will be familiar. Burned itself into Izzy Garcia's mind. It wasn't just a threat. It was a taunt, a personal challenge from a killer who saw himself as a grand dramatist. And her, the leading lady in his macabre play. Arthur Finch wasn't just observing. He was actively engaging, pulling her deeper into his twisted narrative. The revelation of Arthur Finch as the likely K.L. Thorne, or at least the true author of the horrific blueprint, had sent shockwaves through the LAPD. Lieutenant Miller had ordered an immediate, full-scale manhunt. Finch's name and photo were circulated to every unit, every precinct. But Arthur Finch, it seemed, was as adept at vanishing as he was at crafting chilling narratives. Izzy and Ben, fueled by adrenaline and a growing sense of dread, delved deeper into Finch's past. His university records at UCLA painted a picture of a brilliant but increasingly isolated and disturbed student. A double major in English literature, specializing in Victorian Gothic, and a minor in fine arts, focusing on sculpture and anatomical drawing. His academic transcript was stellar, but the dean's notes were concerning exceptional intellect, but poor social integration. Displays a disturbing fascination with morbid subjects. Recent projects have pushed ethical boundaries. One specific note from a former English professor, Dr. Evelyn Reed, mentioned Finch's profound, if unsettling, understanding of the human condition and his unique take on the grotesque in art. This Dr. Reed was a renowned literary critic, particularly for her work on emerging dark fiction authors. Her name, like so many other details, felt unsettlingly familiar, almost pulled from the pages of The Dollhead Killer itself, where the protagonist detective has a brilliant but morally ambiguous academic mentor. They interviewed old classmates, former professors, anyone who remembered Arthur Finch. The consensus was chillingly consistent. A loner, intensely intelligent, fiercely private, prone to bouts of melancholia and sudden, intense bursts of creative energy. He'd often talk about his art, not just his sculptures, but his writing, his philosophies of transformation. One former roommate recalled Finch spending hours meticulously drawing anatomical diagrams, sometimes superimposed with sketches of antique dolls. He always said he wanted to make art that truly moved people, the roommate had said, shivering. I guess he found a way. Meanwhile, Izzy pored over Chapter 3 of The Dollhead Killer. The target victim in the novel was a high school principal, a man described as a purveyor of false hopes, found in a location that held significant personal historical meaning for the killer, referred to as the crucible of my torment. The novel hinted at a place of perceived injustice, where a sense of worthlessness was forged. A high school principal, Izzy mused, tapping her pen against the page, and the crucible of my torment. Finch's childhood home was bleak, yes, but not necessarily a crucible. What about his academic past? Where would a brilliant but troubled young man feel tormented? Where would he have experienced a profound sense of injustice or intellectual betrayal? Ben checked a map of L.A., cross-referencing Finch's known addresses with academic institutions. He dropped out of UCLA after a public dispute with a professor over a thesis project. It was controversial, something about the aesthetic of suffering. He felt his work was misunderstood, even condemned. UCLA? Izzy whispered, a cold dread washing over her. His alma mater, the place where his genius was supposedly betrayed. That fits the crucible description. But a principal? Why a principal if his torment came from academia? Suddenly, another text message buzzed on Izzy's phone. This one was different. It wasn't cryptic. It was a name and an address. Edward Vance, principal of Westwood High, 1540 Wilshire Boulevard. The final lesson begins. The shift in the killer's communication was unnerving, direct, personal. It was no longer a game of clues. It was an invitation. Edward Vance, Izzy quickly verified, was the real-life principal of Westwood High, a prestigious public school with a strong academic reputation, and the address was real. He's giving us the target, Izzy breathed, her voice tight. He wants us to witness his final lesson. This isn't just about recreating the book anymore, Ben. It's about a confrontation. He's inviting us to his masterpiece. Westwood High, Ben confirmed, already reaching for the radio. We need to move. Now. The old brick buildings of Westwood High School stood silent under the pale moonlight, a fortress of learning transformed into a stage for horror. Patrol cars, lights off, idled in the surrounding streets, forming a silent perimeter. Izzy, Ben, and a SWAT team moved through the deserted campus, their footsteps echoing eerily in the empty corridors. The school, usually bustling with adolescent energy, felt like a mausoleum. They found Principal Edward Vance in the school's deserted auditorium, a place where dreams of futures were often celebrated. Vance wasn't dead. Not yet. He was alive, tied to a large wooden cross, which stood on the stage like a grim prop. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth gagged. He had been thoroughly beaten but still conscious. Beside him, meticulously arranged on a table, were various tools. Scalpels, bone saws, and, chillingly, a pristine porcelain doll's head, larger than the previous ones, its features more mature, almost severe. And there, standing on the stage, bathed in a single focus spotlight from the old theatrical lighting rig above, was Arthur Finch. He was not the frail, reclusive figure Elias Croft had described. He was gaunt, yes, but radiated an intense, almost manic energy. His eyes, burning with a disturbing light, fixed on Izzy. He wore a crisp, white lab coat, almost like a surgeon or a performance artist. His hands, though slender, held a scalpel with chilling familiarity. Detective Garcia. Finch's voice was clear, resonant, carrying effortlessly through the cavernous auditorium. It was the voice of a man who commanded attention, a storyteller. Welcome to the final act. I knew you'd come. You've been reading so diligently, after all. A truly dedicated audience. Izzy stepped forward, her hand instinctively going to her holstered weapon, but she kept it holstered. This wasn't a simple arrest. This was a psychological battle. Arthur Finch. It's over. Release Principal Vance. Finch chuckled, a dry, unsettling sound. Over? Detective, it has only just begun. This is my true unveiling. My magnum opus. The novel was merely the prologue, the conceptual framework. Now, I bring it to life, in glorious, undeniable reality. He gestured to Principal Vance with the scalpel. Mr. Vance here represents the oppressive systems that stifle true genius. The gatekeepers who deny recognition to those who dare to challenge convention. Why Arthur? Ben interjected, trying to keep Finch engaged, buying time for the SWAT team to maneuver into position. Why all of this? The dolls, the murders. For a book. Finch's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine rage crossing his face. For a book, detective? You think this is just about a book? This is about justice. About reclaiming what was stolen from me, and about proving my worth to a world that dismissed me as disturbed. He took a step towards Vance, the scalpel glinting. What was stolen, Arthur? Izzy pressed, trying to keep him talking. Your manuscript? The Dollhead Killer? Finch's laugh was sharp, bitter. My manuscript? Yes. My genius? Stolen, repackaged, and sold for profit by a parasitic academic who saw only dollar signs. Not art. Dr. Evelyn Reed. My former professor. My mentor. She had access to my early drafts, my human puppetry collection. She encouraged my darkest thoughts, praised my visionary concepts, only to steal them, publish them under her own anonymous pseudonym, K.L. Thorne, and grow rich off my pain, my brilliance. Izzy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. Dr. Evelyn Reed. The same name from Finch's university records, the one mentioned in the novel as the protagonist's mentor. The puzzle pieces clicked into a horrifying picture. Reed, seeing Finch's volatile genius and his disturbing manuscript, had exploited him. She'd published his work under a pseudonym to protect herself, funneling the profits through a shell corporation. And Finch, enraged by the betrayal and the misappropriation of his art, had decided to take control of his narrative by making the book real. He wasn't just copycatting. He was recreating his stolen work, adding his own bloody director's cut, exposing the stolen narrative, and punishing those who represented the system that had allowed it. The murders were his twisted revenge, a horrifying act of intellectual property reclamation. So the first victims were to prove the book was real? Izzy asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. To draw attention to the authenticity of the novel, your novel? Precisely, Finch exclaimed, almost gleefully. A prologue, a first chapter. Each stitch a confirmation of my authorship. And then the second victim, a subtle deviation, the encore, to show that I was the master, not the mere publisher. And now, the final lesson. Principal Vance here, a symbol of the oppressive educational system that allows intellectual theft and stifles true genius. He raised the scalpel, its tip glinting menacingly towards Vance's throat. You won't get away with this, Arthur, Izzy warned, her hand slowly moving towards her weapon. We know about Dr. Reed. We're going after her. Your story will be told. The truth will come out. Finch paused, his hand trembling slightly, his eyes still locked on Izzy's. Will it, detective? Or will I ensure that my masterpiece is complete, a legacy undeniable? And what a glorious climax it will be. The artist, completing his greatest work, bringing his twisted vision to life. Suddenly, Ben shouted, Police! Drop the weapon, Finch! The SWAT team, having maneuvered into flanking positions, emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on him. Finch's eyes widened, a look of betrayal and defiance replacing his manic glee. He had been so focused on Izzy, so lost in his monologue, he hadn't noticed the silent approach. No, you won't stop me. This is my art. With a desperate, animalistic cry, Finch lunged towards Principal Vance, the scalpel poised. No! Izzy screamed, simultaneously drawing her weapon. There was no time to wait. A shot rang out, echoing deafeningly in the silent auditorium. Finch stumbled, a dark stain blossoming on his white coat. He dropped the scalpel, his eyes wide with shock, not pain. He looked at Izzy, then at the audience seats, then back at her, a strange mix of triumph and despair on his face. He swayed, then collapsed onto the stage, directly beside the bound Principal Vance, his blood staining the polished wood like a grotesque stage prop. The auditorium was chaos. Medics rushed to Principal Vance, confirming he was shaken but alive, albeit with severe bruising. SWAT secured the scene. Izzy stood frozen, her weapon still extended, the scent of gunpowder mingling with the lingering smell of old theater dust and decay. She had fired the shot. The final act. Arthur Finch was dead. He lay on the stage, his eyes still open, fixed on the spotlight above, as if still gazing at his imaginary audience. A genius, consumed by his own darkness and the betrayal of his art. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief. The Dollhead Killer, the phantom of Los Angeles's darkest chapters, was caught. The news exploded. Headlines screamed. The public grappled with the terrifying idea of a novel coming to life and the disturbing brilliance of a killer driven by intellectual property. The next few days were a blur. Izzy and Ben led the investigation into Dr. Evelyn Reed. Armed with Finch's journal, his original manuscript, and the testimony from Elias Croft, they had an airtight case. Dr. Reed, a renowned literary figure, was arrested at her lavish Hollywood Hills home. She denied everything, claiming Finch was a disturbed student who had obsessed over her work. But the evidence, particularly the meticulously documented digital trail of the stolen manuscript submission and the Shell Corporation payments, was overwhelming. She had seen Finch's unique genius, his disturbed mind, and her own opportunity. She had leveraged his psychosis for profit, believing his anonymity would protect her. She had created K.L. Thorne out of Arthur Finch's stolen nightmares. The media frenzy was immense. The public grappled with the idea of art inspiring such brutality, and the chilling complicity of the publishing world. Izzy and Ben were hailed as heroes, but they felt the heavy weight of the moral ambiguities. The case wasn't clean. It was messy, tangled, and deeply unsettling. Izzy found herself haunted. The line between fiction and reality had blurred in the most terrifying way. She questioned the nature of creativity, obsession, and the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary, even brilliant people. She reread The Dollhead Killer one last time, not as a blueprint for a killer, but as a chilling artifact of a brilliant, broken mind. The descriptions of the dolls, the meticulous staging, the underlying philosophical questions about art and identity, they now carried an unbearable weight of truth. The novel was no longer just a story. It was a testament to the depths of human despair and depravity. The police never found Chloe Sterling's head, or Alicia Vane's, or Evelyn Hayes's. The dolls' heads were the only true heads, Finch's ultimate statement of artistic transformation. He had, in his twisted mind, truly transformed his victims into his art. The fate of their real heads remained a macabre secret, a final, unspoken detail in his horrifying collection. Months later, Dr. Evelyn Reed was indicted on multiple counts, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. The legal battle would be long and complex, a televised spectacle that would pick apart the ethics of authorship, intellectual theft, and the terrifying influence of art. Izzy sat in her quiet apartment one evening, a glass of whiskey in her hand, staring out at the city lights. Los Angeles, the city of dreams, still glittered, but for her, it carried a new, permanent shadow. The Dollhead Killer case was closed, but its ghost lingered. The dolls' heads, the meticulous staging, the chilling notes, they were burned into her memory. She knew that the collection truly ended, but the seeds of similar horrors, born from frustrated genius or unacknowledged darkness, could always be planted elsewhere. The silence from K.L. Thorne's encrypted email account remained unbroken, but now, it felt less like a protective veil of anonymity and more like a tombstone, marking the grave of a tortured artist and the victims who became his final, unwilling masterpieces. The twisted novel had truly come to life, etching its darkest chapters onto the soul of Los Angeles, a nightmare from which the city would never fully awaken.